Class 8, that means 4 weeks in. There were technically 2 chapters, even though they pretty much were the same thing. One was extremely short. So I'll go over what the differences are. Definitely go over examples. I'll go over the graded assignment 2 intro. And I will briefly talk about the studio, but the studio is everything that I'm doing for the examples is what the studio will pretty much be, just in a different way. So I'm not going to touch on the studio too much tonight. So there's different types of design patterns whenever you're talking about software engineering. It also depends on if you're doing a full stack versus just an API. There's service silos, there's all different types of design patterns. And to be honest, depending on your situation, they all could be the best one, depending on what your situation is. So I do want you to know that Model View Controller is one of the more well-known ones because it's kind of just very generic. But whenever you get into MVC, there are other like sub things that you could talk about in there, depending on how big your application is. So design patterns, definitely know this MVC. I'll talk about it a little bit more here in a second. But also know that there are other very acceptable design patterns. There's not just one. Spring, that's a framework or a library that has a bunch of different libraries that you can use. Spring Boot is one of them. Spring MVC is one of them. So we'll briefly talk about those. Mainly, everybody knows what in the Java world knows what Spring is, and all of the different flavors of what Spring can provide do kind of blend together. You do need to know which ones to kind of get started with. So Spring Boot is how you get started, but there's like Spring Security if you want to bring in authentication. There's different database ones. So there's a ton of different Spring dependencies that you can bring in. We're just going to focus on some of the major ones. Framework versus a library. Library is just a section of code. So technically each of these independently are libraries, but how they are structured, so your framework is kind of like your structure. Do you have to follow their rules, or can you just do whatever you want to and just bring in their code? So if they make you have rules, then it's more of a framework rather than, oh, I just like that code, I'm just going to go use it, as more of a library. So that's why, like with React, React is more of a library because you can steal little parts of React here or there and use it however you want to, where that's why Angular is more considered a framework, because if you don't follow their structure, you can't use it. Like you can't just pick parts of it away. With Spring, once you are in the Spring ecosystem, you have to do some things Spring's way. You can't use some libraries of Spring without bringing, Spring like configurations in. So that's why it is more of a framework, where you'll hear them talk about like the Spring Security library, because that's just the code you're bringing in, but Spring as an ecosystem is more of a framework. I'll talk a little bit more about Tomcat here in a second. I think I put a slide on it. If I didn't, I'll definitely bring it up. The Tomcat and Gradle and what those really are. I looked them up. I can't remember if I put them in the slides, to be honest. But I do want to focus on this MVC. So Model View Controller. I know this is, I stole this from the textbook, and they didn't have a white background on it, and I was too lazy to put a white background on it. So I know it's hard to see, but you can see that in the textbook. Key concepts. Your model is more or less the data. How is it structured? Why in Java it's object-oriented. When you build a class, that's your model. So I will try to help solidify what that is later during the example, but your model is kind of like your data. It's just text, more or less, like it's data. It's not how it looks. The view is how it looks. So all of the stuff with HTML, CSS, all the stuff with interactive, the user interface, that's your view. And so you have this data, you have this view, and then what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to take this data, such as like we're going to make a pet something. I can call it a pet store, but it won't get that big. But let's say that I have this pet store. I want to be able to display pets to the user, and I want them to be able to, you know, click buttons and click pictures and all that kind of stuff. But they need to be able to know what pets are available. How the pet information is handled and structured is your model. How it is displayed to the user is the view. But how does it get there? Because whenever I click on rabbits, I only want the rabbits to show. When I click on cats, I only want the cats to show. So that in-between step is your controller. It controls the data flow between your model and your view. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense on this MVC structure. You're always trying to think, is it in my model? Is it in my controller? Is it in my view? And how do I get data from my model into my view? How do I get updates from the view, like some kind of event request of, you know, show me all the rabbits? How does my data know that I want rabbits? So it's that the controller is what helps pass that on. It seems like I did not put the thing in about Tomcat and Gradle. So here's kind of what I want to structure this. So we have Java, which is the application code. Technically, whenever you deploy that, so I know when we run it in IntelliJ, it just kind of runs free willy. But whenever you actually deploy that, you usually deploy it in what we call a jar. So it's a compiled code that would run. And then it usually runs on a JVM, a Java virtual machine. So that knows how to interact with the hardware. Now, to even get to compiled code, to build your code, we are using Gradle. That's what LaunchCode has chosen. Everywhere else that I've worked uses the Maven builder, but it doesn't really matter. There's technically Ant. I've heard of it. It's an older one, but usually Gradle and Maven are your two builders. So don't think of it as code. Don't think of it as really, once your code is deployed, nobody cares that it's Gradle or Maven. Whenever you're writing your code, nobody cares if it's Gradle or Maven. What's happening is once you write your code and you said, build this code so that my computer can understand it, that service there, that you know, thing that converts it is either Gradle or Maven. So that's what the Gradle's purpose is just to build it. Tomcat, so it's an Apache service that Spring naturally brings in for you. So Spring handles this. Before Spring, you actually had to set up an Apache server, an Apache Tomcat server, and then somehow tie your code to it so that Tomcat knew to look where to go to see your code to then run it. Where Spring does this all for you. So Spring does what it calls dependency injections and all these kind of fancier words that just bring in this code. It starts Tomcat for you. And then the Tomcat server is just running there so that whenever people are making requests, they're not actually requesting from your code. They're requesting from Tomcat, but then Tomcat knows where to go to grab the code that it needs to run. So Tomcat is the kind of like the web server that has to be running for your code to get used on the website. MVC different from with front end and back end? No. It's still the separation. The whole point about this design pattern, remember there's different types of design patterns, but with this design pattern, it's trying to mentally have you separate, you know, the model of how your data is, like the shape of it, you know, what attributes, what properties you have in a object should be separate from your view, which should be separate from your controller. And then those things should interact and flow. The controller should be the controller that goes back and forth between the two. So it's just a design pattern of really trying to separate and better think about your project, your application as a whole. Controllers and routing. I just threw a bunch of them up here because this is the exciting part. We go from last week or on Monday talking about polymorphism and inheritance and all of these very complex things to now this is where it starts getting fun. You can actually interact with this stuff. You should be, if you haven't already built like 3 Spring applications already and just tested it, then you're behind. You should have, even if they were mistakes, meaning if you made one and then you messed it up and you're like, I don't even know what to do to make it right again, and threw it away and then made another one, that's perfect. You should be making these should become almost instinctual on going to start.spring.io, choosing some things and making them, because we're going to have to make one almost, every week now. We're just going to make new ones. But these are all in the controller. So they had the model, view, and controller. They separated those, and they're really talking about the controller first. I will show you a little bit today on how the model kind of fits in, and I'm not going to focus too much on the view, because the way that we're doing this here, the view and the controller are like very tightly coupled, because we are just sending the view back in the controller, where in a couple weeks or I don't know exactly where it is, when we get to time leaf, I know it's not next time, but I think it's the time after maybe, we will separate the view. So you'll actually write all of your view stuff in a time leaf template, and then your controller will call that template. So you're separating them, where right now for these things, we have bound those together. So we're not using MVC. These are the main things. I will go over, I think, each of these individually as I go through. If I don't, let me know. There were 2 things that I pulled out from the questions in Discord. One was they talked about like doing like Git branching and like this Git stuff. I'm going to show you what I would do, but I will show you how to create branches and that kind of stuff today. And then separately with graded assignment 2, I'll probably save that all the way at the end, but I'll give you a little intro on what you're really doing and kind of a timeline. Even though I forgot to write down when it is due. So if somebody wants to post that, I say it later, but I think it's in probably 2 weeks. Yeah, I forgot to type it up. I know it's in May. But again, let's get to the live coding. Let's have some fun with this. I'll come back to that later. First of all, the exercise, I don't think I did the exercise, but I didn't really focus on it too much. So if you have questions about the exercise that I don't answer with what I'm doing, let me know. The first thing we're going to do, we're just going to recreate something. We just want to create it. So I'm going to go start to finish on how to create something. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to start.spring.io. And it looks nice here. Kotlin, if you click this Kotlin, you should be clicking this Kotlin. I understand that it does look a little weird because you're like, Groovy, what is Groovy? Groovy is another Java-like language that's more for functional programming and not object-oriented. So Groovy is like almost like a subset of Java. You don't need to memorize that. Rarely are you ever going to know anybody that actually writes in Groovy unless if it's an older programmer. So I wouldn't worry about that. But again, I'm used to clicking this Maven button. LaunchCode has decided to go with Gradle, Java. So snapshots are like development code. They're not fully fleshed out. Whenever you get to a job, like my job, whenever I create a version to then post to the like production code, it'll look something like this, 3.2.5. And as soon as I post that code and send it off to production, I immediately go 3.2.6 snapshot. So snapshot just means that's my development code. That's what I'm working on right now. but it's not quite production ready. So when you look at these snapshots, just know that they've posted them here, and they're amazing programmers. They're not going to post really bad code, but it's not fully fleshed out. So I would stick away from the snapshots. But this 325, perfectly fine. It doesn't matter what you name these things. Jar and war, these are different packaging types. Like I said, usually whenever you create and you actually build the Java and the compilable code, they usually write in a jar. War is usually a bigger and older thing. So if you see a war, it's usually with like a monolith application. It's not a small application, it's a really big one. So we're going to do jar. And then these are your Java versions that are currently kind of updated. To be honest, I'm messing with 21 right now, but we'll do 17 just because LaunchCode said. All these dependencies, so these are all the libraries that you can pull from. And as you scroll, there's a ton of them, right? There's just, they go on forever. They added all of these AI ones. So if you guys are interested in AI, you can probably do that. There's your OpenAI, Neo4j. I don't know if any of you are into AI stuff. Amazon Bedrock. So AWS is creating this Bedrock. There's all these different things. I don't know really what they do as much as I know that they're key common words with AI. So, but again, you can look through all of these. Ones that I've used before, I don't use a lot. Man, there are so many. I don't even do cloud-based things right now. I have tried to do test containers. Didn't work as well as I hoped, so I didn't stay with it. Graphite, Datadog, these are observability tools. So whenever you get into actually like monitoring your production services, those are things that you'll see. Messaging, yeah. I haven't used Spring for messaging. Our messaging app at work, we used Go for the messaging. So we didn't use Spring. So here you're starting to get into, yeah, here's NoSQL database. So hopefully some of you maybe have heard of MongoDB. It's like a document DB. Redis is a memory caching DB. We later will actually use this MySQL driver because that's the database that we will learn in LaunchCode, but these are all different types of drivers that all I do is I click, we'll use the H2. H2 is an in-memory database, so every time you restart your service, the memory goes away, but it looks identical to a MySQL, so the execution looks the same, it just doesn't hold it. So we can start with H2 and we don't even have to set up a database just to see functionality, and then we can transfer over to the MySQL driver, and then we can actually store our information in a MySQL database. Spring Data, this is your bigger one, and your Spring JDBC Java database connector. This is how it connects to your database. JPA is your persistence layer. We'll talk about all of that stuff whenever we deal with database stuff and hook it up. Here's your security ones. So Spring Security in general, but if you are going to hook up to Okta or OAuth 2, you can do those. Here's the time leaf that we're going to be doing next week. So these are templating engines. We're almost done with this. Here's Spring Web Services, though. So services, manipulate XML and SOAP development. I've heard about this, but I've never had to deal with it, so I never really have dealt it. If you get into Spring, really, like this is kind of a newer thing, is this reactive web, which uses Webflux. I've seen people that have started to move to this. It handles things more asynchronously for you, which if you know asynchronous can be, if handled properly, faster. because then I can handle 5 different things all at the same time rather than one and then the other and then the other. So we don't need to learn that now because we're not dealing with that high traffic. So we're going to stick with just Spring Web. I think in the video, they also talked about this Spring Boot dev tools. So here's my little 2 cents on this. When Spring Boot dev tools work well, they're nice. The biggest thing that I have seen that still does not work to my satisfaction is this live reload. So you're supposed to, when you make a change, it'll sense that you made a change, and instead of you having to hit the stop and then start, it'll just refresh your server for you and re-deliver all of your code live. Now, it isn't like a millisecond, it takes a second, but it senses it and it reloads it for you, which is super powerful whenever you're making a change and then you want to go to your website to see if your change happens, instead of you having to rebuild. So whenever you rebuild, remember how we talked about Tomcat, it actually shuts down Tomcat and then restarts Tomcat, where what this does is it just edits your code and then slaps it right on top of Tomcat. So it doesn't have to take as long to refresh, like to reload all of your stuff. The problem is IntelliJ. I don't know if it's DevTools. I don't know if it's IntelliJ. I don't know if it's a versioning or whatever else, but I was trying to do this yesterday to help show you what this looks like. And it doesn't work how I want it to. I got it to work, but it's so slow that I'm not going to show it today. If I get it working by next time, I'll definitely show that, because I have seen it work pretty well. But some other developer tools, Docker is a container service that a lot of people use. If it says developer tools, what that does is it puts tools in there for you as a developer, but whenever it actually writes the code, it's not giving you any extra libraries for like enhancements or anything. These are just like Lombok. It pulls in libraries for you so that you can reduce some of your code. I've seen some people use this. When I use it for small things, it works perfectly. Whenever I use it for more advanced things, it actually breaks some things, and then I don't know how it breaks it, so I don't use it. And then this Graal VM, you might hear about that. It's Java usually is compilable code that goes to jars, but with this Graal, it actually can make it go to EXEs, so executables, which are a much different thing in the Java world. So they're still playing with this. Some people are going to it. It's only for small code. It's not for like big applications. So we're not going to focus on that. But just there's so many different things that Spring does and helps and setups for developers. That's why it's still around. The competitor to Spring is Cortic. Somebody here has told me about it. I have went to one and I've seen it. It's not as big as Spring, so I don't use it, but there are other things out there. Okay. I talked a long time. Hopefully that gives you a better insight into what Spring can offer. So those of you that really want to get into it, you can pick a couple of the other ones, or look at tutorials. And now that you've seen some of the ones that I've done, you can maybe pick better tutorials. You can, it's all, okay, so this works for, a good question came in, can you switch add dependencies mid-project? You can always do whatever you want to, but when you're talking about ease, this goes with database stuff as well. If you want to add things, usually I don't see a problem. This is talking about like database columns. If I said a person has a name, a date of birth, and an ID, and then later I want to give them an address property, I can add an address property later, and it's usually not going to break much. Yes, I still have to refactor a couple of things, but it's not going to break much. Anytime you remove anything, this is whether it's dependencies or database structures, mid-project, you might have some issues. Meaning, if I had a person that I had name, date of birth, ID, and location, and then later said, oh, I don't really want that location. As soon as I remove that from my model, my data, there's still things that have that in there. So it's much harder to remove things than it is to just add. So yes, go ahead and add. What I usually do, especially because of GitHub, I create a new branch. I'll show you that in a second. I create a new branch, and then I add or modify or delete. And then if it doesn't work, I just delete the branch, and it didn't affect my code. That's why LaunchCode says use branches, but I'll explain that. Okay. Answering some questions. Who generally builds dependencies? So these are major companies. Like Spring is actually owned by, I can't even remember anymore. Each of them are underneath people. Like VMware does something with Spring. Anyway, a lot of people try to build these dependencies. The good news is we just get to use them. If you go into well, how do the dependencies actually work? Unfortunately, you'll spend so much time doing that you won't actually code. So so what do these databases hold? How do you determine which to choose when creating projects? When we get into the database section of LaunchCode, definitely bring up these database questions. I know a decent amount about them, but I don't know if that'll help you guys right this second on anything. Next assignment, going to use Spring. Everything from here on out is Spring. It's a good analogy. You know, you don't need to be a mechanical engineer to change your oil. That's a lot of how this is. Like, there are some very smart people that do very great things, and you let them do their things, and then we over here actually apply them. Because many of the people that write this, they may not be good on the business side to actually use it in a good business application. So everybody kind of has their own position and strength. We just need to keep working on those. And if people can build us tools, then we can use them. Okay. So I'm going to hit generate. That took way too long, but I'm going to hit generate. This is how I do it. I go into my thing here. I actually just say copy. And then I go to my location that I want to go to. I know this is super small. Do not worry about my location, but I just going to my homework location. This is where I put all my LaunchCode stuff. And then I do Control V. And it just pasted, and it's called Pet Store because that's what my artifact name is right here. So my pet store is right here. And then again, I don't know how many times I've said it. I right click and then just say open folder as IDEA Community Edition project. So this opens it up in IntelliJ. That's the fastest way. So you can imagine that only took me, if I didn't talk, that would have taken me like 30 seconds. And now I have something that runs. Now it's not very good. It doesn't really do much. Actually, it does nothing. But I can go into this pet store application. It says that you're supposed to do this build run, boot run, boot something, boot run. You can do that. I think I've just got very accustomed just to going up here and like hitting the run button. I will zoom in before I forget. You guys don't really need to see much of what's going on right this second because it's all the same, but just want to make sure whenever you do this, you will rarely touch this main method here. So this just starts it. That's all that matters. It starts it. This is where you hit the run. Everything else is done after that, like elsewhere. So whenever Spring starts, again, it compiles the Java, it processes all the resources, it actually built out the tasks, and then it actually runs this main. And this main builds out your Spring using Spring Boot. And then it starts that Tomcat web service. It does all this other stuff. It's setting up your actual local host. And now it says started in however many seconds. So within a minute, I can create a Spring Boot application and get it started and running on here. How do I know that it's well, working is a relative term. How do I tell that it is running? If I go to localhost 8080, it says this application. If it wasn't running, it would not say this application because it wouldn't even know that there's an application running. So this means that my Java is running. Now, obviously, I haven't put anything in it, so it's not really running anything important. So let's put something in it. Let's actually create, eventually we're going to create a form that then creates a pet and displays that pet back to the user. That's what we're going to try to do. So when we are talking about structure, these are common structures. If I go to new package, you usually have a controller package. You would usually have a model package. Now, again, Java does not by itself handle the view. So our view will actually be under these templates down here eventually. But today we're not going to deal with those. So again, I'm breaking out. Here's where my controller logic goes. Here's where my model logic goes. And then here's where my view is. We have done controllers in this lesson. So let's go ahead and do this. And I'm going to say that this is my pet controller. My pet controller is going to be a controller. Now, this is where I'm going to say something different than LaunchCode. They say to use controller, which is a generic controller, and then they say to put this response body on there. Because everything I have ever built actually uses a response body, meaning if I hover over this, it's indicating a method we return a value that should be bound to the response, the response body. Remember how when you get a request in, that then you get a response back, and there's going to be like headers, and there's going to be the body of the response. This is going to bind anything that I send back to that body. So I don't have to do, because then the other, do I remember it? I think this is right. Yeah. So this is how we used to do things, and you can still do this. So if you do some Googling on response entities, what this does is this allows me to fine tune that I'm going to send an OK, like a 200 message back. So this is saying that it's going to be a 200, and then my body is going to be whatever I put in here. But I have to declare what my body is. It doesn't know. If I put response body here, then I can just return this. I can just return this, and it will put it in my response body. So that's the power of having this response body, is I can just do my normal logical Java brain. I don't have to think about response entities and like headers and bodies and all that kind of stuff. This is going to bind my return back to the response body every time. And if all I'm doing is writing a normal API of just getting information, that's all I need. Another layer on top of that, if I'm going to have a controller where everything is returning a response body, there is a type of controller that does that, and it's called a REST controller. So what I usually do is I just do REST controller instead of doing controller and response body. The REST controller will do both for you. And if I hover over this, it does controller and response body. Again, it's an interface, which means that it kind of encapsulates a lot of things. And these are all the things that it encapsulates. So when I say response or REST controller, it does all of this stuff for me. So I don't have to do that. So a convenience annotation that itself is annotated with controller and response body. Okay. I just want to point that out because you're going to see me do that all the time. That's just instinct for me by this point. But it does take place. It isn't that LaunchCode stuff is wrong. It's just I like to go fast. That also means that I don't have to put much on here. So I do like how they do request mapping. I don't always remember the terms. I always have to search them. And I'm going to say pets because this is a pet controller. It is very, very common that you will have a request mapping at the top that matches the name of your controller. That's because if I create another controller, if I don't have this here, I could have a hello get mapping here and a hello get mapping in another controller. And if they don't have a different like subcategory there, they'll conflict. So it's very common that we always put a request mapping. This is the slash whatever for this controller. That's how to get to this controller. And then once I do that, then I have to put some kind of mapping on each of my methods here. And you need to just get familiar with putting something in here. You don't have to put, like you could leave it blank or just leave it slash. I am fine with this. I don't know why, but I don't like this. I think sometimes we forget where it goes if we do that. So if we at least have it blank or with a slash, it like reminds us that that's the root. So if I went to pet and that's all I went to, it would go to this one. Oftentimes though, this is going to match here. So it's something similar to this. It doesn't have to be, but usually it ties together. So again, I'm not going to get pet. I'm going to create a pet. And then if I'm going to create a pet, because pet's already up here, I'm just going to say create. So this is my get mapping for create. I don't know if I've said this enough times, but anytime I get to a good like stopping point, I want to test. Now, for the graded assignments, they actually make tests, like official tests. Mine's more of user testing. So if I restart this application, and if I go to localhost 8080/pet/create, I'm actually going to that. It says that it started. So then I'm going to go to my web host here. This is local 8080. I'm going to go to /pet. I'm going to go /create. And it says my pet. And of course, you can put whatever you want to here, meaning hopefully you guys know that HTML is still a string. HTML is still text. So I could do something weird like something like this. And now it made it an H1 tag. The HTML is just text whenever you send it back. The other thing that I want to kind of show, and I think they showed this. first of all, my pet is actually in an H1 tag, but also this network tab, I use this all the time. So whenever I go to this, it is so big that I don't know where my stuff is. Oh, there it is. It's underneath. Sorry. No, it's not. All right. All right. Here it is right here. So whenever I did this, it is telling me that it sent a request to the URL pet create. It got a 200 error and it used the get method. And then these are all the things that it sent. The response was this. So this network tab allows me to kind of figure out what is being sent and received whenever I do this stuff. So. All right. Create pet. Let's see, what should we do now? Let's actually create some kind of pet. Let's do create. And let's actually create a pet. So this pet should have a name. And that should have a species. So like I can say Fido, that's my dog. Well, I need to ingest those things. So I need a string of name and a string that is species. And then right here, I'm going to say my pet. I'm going to say, I am horrible at HTML. Now you guys see how slow of a typer I am. This is. All right. So something like this, right? I don't know what you mean by string interpolation. Where did my browser go? Okay, so here, create. All right, so here's, it didn't error, right? Like it said, and it gave me back these things. It did not error out. But it didn't actually grab the stuff. And that's because we didn't tell it to. Whenever we say that we actually want to, like, it doesn't know where to get this name is. It's not a separate method. Like what we usually do is we usually call create pet, and then we actually type in a name and a type, right? So that's what we normally do. But we're not doing that. So it needs to know how to grab it. And that's what we need to do here is these are, I wish it would, there it is. And path parameter, request parameter. Wait a second. Yeah, request parameter is definitely sent in the request. And or query parameter. There's a path variable. There you go. I always have to search these up. I knew it was path because this is your path of your URL. And the other one should be like a query. Knowing vocabulary is super helpful whenever you're trying to find things. So now if I send this again, it actually knows how to grab the path things. So hopefully the path thing makes sense. If I wanted to do the same thing, but instead of create pet path, instead of doing that, if I wanted to do the query, I think it's query. No, is it request? This one must be request. I'm just naming these different. So now there's two ways to create. I can do it. I can still do it this way. I didn't refresh. This is where that dev, like if you actually install the dev thing and it actually works, what you would have saw was you would have saw this, like do some magic here and it would say spring again, and then it would reload this if we had those dev tools actually working. I didn't even install them, but that's what the dev tools does for you. Right. So I can do it this way. This still works, but I could also say question mark name equals and species equals. And let me change that just so that we don't think we got the same thing. Somehow he magically became a cat. Okay, so now we have a pet. We can do it either through request parameters, or this is actually called, when you're sending data across, it usually is called a query, query parameter. Yeah, preview payload, name, query, string parameters. There we go. So this is what I also look at. So my payload, this is what I'm sending to them. I'm sending name equals Doug and species equals cat. So then it actually breaks it apart, makes it more visual down here. So definitely start getting familiar with these dev tools and just see what things look like. All right. So now we can make it call back. And I think the only other thing that they really talked about was a form. I do want to call out, not that you have to do it, but there is like delete mapping. So if I wanted to delete something, I would actually make it a delete. And then there's also an update. No, patch. Patch mapping, there we go. So patch is an update. So when you do patch mapping, it is an update. Forms. Okay, so let's do another get mapping. And now we're going to do a create form, public string create pet by way of form. And remember, whenever I'm actually sending or doing the form, I actually don't need any parameters. This is just sending the HTML for the form. And because I am horrible about creating HTML, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here. I'm just going to randomly start an HTML file over here, and I'm going to call it pet form. You don't need to do this, but this gives me all my HTML here. And then whenever I say something like div, it actually shows me maybe some options. It's not as good as VS Code, but it actually shows me at least something. So like a label, we called it name, right? Name, and then an input. Ooh, I need to wrap this around a form, don't I? Form. And then with form, there's actions. And the action, I'm going to leave blank for right this second. We'll come back to that. Action, and then method. And that's going to be a post method. Let's do that. Let's do, I like putting my labels and inputs in a div. Input, type, text, and then name is name. The white name here is the name of the attribute, where name is the actual value of the name attribute. That's what, this is what I'm tying back to. And then let's do type text. This is going to be species. And then the name of this input, like how am I binding it, is going to be species. And then another div for, I think it's an input type submit. Value, I think is what you put in the text. I think this is right. Hopefully. The reason I did this, as you can see, like the colors there. So then whenever I select all and hit copy here, and I go back here and I hit return, and I go ahead and put in my quotes there, I just hit Control V and it pastes it all in for me. So that's the reason I did that, because it would take me 20 minutes to do this if I didn't have the color coding and the helping out there. So just another little trick if you want it. You don't need to put the new lines in there because HTML is not line specific. Like you can just put HTML all in one line and it knows how to read it because it has open tags and closed tags. That's how it reads it. It does not care about white space. Let's see if this shows me my form. So again, I'm going to pet.createForm. There is a way, I don't know how to do it because I've never done it before. There is a way of using other methods that, yes, you can import a form and change it to a string, and it would do the same thing for you. There are ways to do that. I don't know it off the top of my head, and I didn't have time to Google anything like that. But yes, you can bring in forms. There's actually two different ways to do it, but that's probably the better one to do it. Anyway, if I go here and I say create form, there's my form, name and species. Now, whenever I hit submit, it wasn't because I didn't type anything. It's because there's no explicit mapping for this. Meaning, I have it mapped, well, I don't have it, I have it mapped to /nothing, right? I think I have it, the action is /nothing right here. So it is trying to go to the root, it's trying to go to localhost 8080, and I don't have a controller set up for that. So it says, I don't know what you're trying to do. What I want it to do is I want it to actually create this. So I'm going to take this one and put it into my action here and rerun this. And then when I rerun this, it still had a problem. it sent it with form data. You are absolutely right. I said to use method post, but I don't have any post things up here. So this, if I said a get, let's see if that works. It says method not allowed. So right. I think that works. Right. So I have a form. So we've used get mappings on all these. And what's really weird is I used a get mapping to send to another get mapping, which is perfectly fine. So my hesitation, or not my hesitation, something that you have to understand. Whenever I type anything into a browser in the URL at the top and I hit enter, it can only be a get method every single time. That's the only thing you can do as a get method in a browser. On the other hand, I could change this to a post mapping. So remember my request parameters here. We'll remember I did not save that thing yet, so it should still be on the. If I say Doug and Snake, I can change this to dog, right? So this is my create endpoint. I know that's super hard to see, but it's this create endpoint, and I'm putting in my parameters, but I had it as get. Now, whenever I refresh this, and now I make it post, now whenever I hit this, it says method not allowed because I switched it to a post. Browsers can only do get. That's a common error I see all the time is sometimes we have the right logic, we just don't have the right method. This is another reason why I go here and I look at my headers and it is a get method right here. Now, if I change, now that I changed that to post, if I change this back to post and rerun it, and I go do my create form, my form gets brought up because that is a get method. And I said on this one, it's a get mapping. And then when I hit this, it's actually a post method. I got the browser to do a post method, but that's because it was running HTML that said do a post method. You cannot click into the URL with this. So hopefully that makes sense. My HTML is right here. I just put it onto this one to make it look pretty. But I've just been changing it here. So I have this. And I just do this so that I can do Control A, which selects it all, Control C, and then let's say that I did update something. If I have the string already there, already set up, and then I hit Control V, it'll put it all kind of nicely for me. Let's see, what else am I gonna do with this? Fine. Let's actually bring into the model thing. Because I'm dealing with a pet, now we aren't actually storing into a database yet. So you're gonna have to imagine that eventually we will do that. So for doing the purposes here, this next step, you're like, well, why would you do this? Well, it's to lead you to the next step. I wouldn't do it if this is all we were doing. So imagine that I actually had to store stuff into a database. I might want a pet model. So I already created that model package before, and here's a pet. And then just like before, where you've always done this is a model class. So all I care about is, what does a pet look like? So a pet has to have a name, that's a string. And then a pet has to have a string species, right? That's all it needs. Now to actually use this, I need a constructor. So I'm going to create a constructor with both of those. And then let's see what that does. So over here, instead of saying name and species, I'm going to actually set up a new pet. So I'm going to say pet. Come on. My pet equals new pet. And I'm going to pass in the name and the species. And then down here, instead of name, I'm going to say my name, okay, so first, I'm gonna do this later. I don't want to get rid of it because I hate typing HTML. But I'm actually just going to return my pet. Now this is going to throw an error at first, because what am I saying that I'm returning? I say I'm returning a string, but my pet is not a string, it's a pet. So I'm going to say, hey, go ahead, return my pet. I don't care that it's a string, I just want my pet. Here's where that request, this response body comes in. We'll see. I'll show you. So what it returns. So I'm going to do everything else the same. The only difference is, now when I get my name and my species from my post of my form, it's actually going to create a new pet and it's going to return my pet. And I do have to restart this so that it actually knows that to run the new code. So it says name. So down here, remember, this is a GET request. My response was HTML because that's what I told it to respond with. When I click this, not acceptable. This is another common error that you never see. Like, I see people get this and they're like, I have no clue, because it doesn't give you much information. But me knowing that I mess up all the time, so I know when I mess up. What happened was, whenever I set this pet, it actually did. Actually, let's show you this. It still won't tell you, but let's actually rerun this in debug mode. I want to show you debugging tools. So I'm going to stop and rerun, but I'm going to rerun it in debug. So down here, it changes how it looks a little bit. It's actually in the debugger. It does take a little bit longer to start up the debugger. I'm also like streaming and have Zoom on and all those things. So this usually is a little bit quicker, but it's not right now. Okay, so now it's in debugging mode. The cool news is, I'm going to do the create form again. Come on. I'm going to type in my stuff. And when I hit this create pet, it doesn't error out. And my status says pending. That's because my Java service on the back end has stopped. Not errored out, it just it's not responding. So if I go back, my debugger has stopped. Like it picked up on my breakpoint that I put right there. So now I have a breakpoint. It says it recognizes that Doug and Kat are coming in. If I hit new line, it tells me that it actually made a pet with the right properties. So even in my debugger, everything should be good. Then when I hit next line, it throws an error. I don't know if this, I have not looked at this part enough. I'm just gonna hit play. In my console though, it says that HTTP media type not acceptable, exception, no acceptable representation. What that means is you aren't giving it the right access to actually give the pet back. And this is talking about these private and public. So everything I am giving back right now, I'm not allowing anybody to see the species or the name. I'm allowing them to create one, but I'm not allowing them to get it back, any attributes of that back. So this is where I do have to do my getters, because this will allow it to return back. So once I stop and rerun this, it returns something back. It does not error out, but whenever I do this, it returns it back in this format. And if you remember, this format is called a JSON format, JavaScript object notation. This is how most APIs give back information. So if I want to separate my front end from my back end, this is exactly what I want to do. I want to return a pet. I can return a list of pets. I can return whatever I want to, but when I return it, it's going to look like this. And then on the front end, you're going to actually ingest that and then make it look pretty on the front end. So when we get into unit 3, that is the mindset that we'll have. Like the front end and back end are two different things, and you're passing back and forth JSON. So, of course, it doesn't go over that right now, but I just want to make sure that you know. And again, I hate writing HTML. So what we're going to do now is instead of returning my pet, we're going to return these things, but I'm not going to return name. I'm going to return a string, because remember, HTML is a string. But instead of returning the name, I'm going to say my pet dot get name and my pet dot get species. So this is, instead of pulling it directly from the parameter, it is creating a new pet, and it's actually pulling the name and the species from the pet. Again, they should be the same. And it does. Okay. A little preview into being able to put in other objects besides strings in there. For you guys, for the rest of unit 2, though, you're going to probably put strings here because you're going to be returning either HTML or templates of HTML. So don't overthink what I just said with the pet. Just know that you can return different things. And if you return anything but a string, it will return that object as JSON. So every language can do this. I can write almost everything I just did in Python. It just depends on what language you want. And again, my default is to think like I am working at NetSmart, where I'm working on a project that's big enough to have 20 different developers on it that's making billions of dollars a year. That is a much different system than making a personal website or a small application that 10, 20, even 100 people see a day. That you don't have PHI that accidentally might leak out, that you don't have all this kind of stuff. So remember, there are different levels, and I absolutely can create a marketing website in all JavaScript using Node or whatever else, and it works just fine. So I don't want to go down the road of what's the main difference is Java is usually used for an API service. It is extremely efficient and great at object modeling because it is an object-oriented programming language. It is great with working with databases because it just understands structure. So if you're working with a MySQL database or a Postgres database, Java is going to be one of the #1 languages you want to hook up to that, because it just makes sense across how to program, how it works together, all that kind of stuff. But you usually are not going to run front end code with this. You're not going to send HTML and JavaScript through this. In a real world situation, you are going to let React, Angular, whatever else handle all that for you. Because then you're going to make it interactive and make it run kind of on the client machine rather than the server machine. So all of this is running on a server in the back end. So the client cannot get access to my pets. It secures, it walls off. I'm not going to send them all that stuff. And then on top of that, I'm going to authenticate through this stuff. There's so many different layers. Like with Spring Security, it automatically just locks your machine down, so you have to authenticate. Where all of that stuff, you can do it in JavaScript. You can do it, but again, this is I'm just thinking about that, big company that you guys might work for, not the startup company that then will sell and then not exist after 5 years. Great question. When it returned the pet object, it Spring handle using the getters, because you expected to use the memory address of the object. So because of the response body, or because we had the annotation of REST controller, which implemented the response body annotation, yes, Spring actually goes inside the object, iterates through all of the properties of that object, grabs them all out, and it has to use the getters for that, and then returns those properties and values. Spring does that. Java does not natively, but Spring is doing that for you. This is, I have no clue. There, it's gone. Right. Come on, I know there's something else. What else did I want to show you? I had another thing I was working on. Where did it go? Okay, this is the one I was working on earlier. Yeah, I don't know. Right. Was there anything else that was shown in the videos that you wanted me to go over? I'm going to pull up. What were all these method names? I want to make sure that I touched on all these. The ones that I put on there are important for you guys to see. Path variable, request parameter. So we went over those. Response body. If you combine controller with response body, you can do REST controller. Request mapping, post and get mapping. So I think I went over there. The word route, you'll hear me throw it around. That's just like the whatever / whatever / whatever. So the route is like the path. And make sure that it makes sense. And then some people forget that if you do a request mapping up here, you have to put this before the other ones. What else? Grant asked that question after I stopped the recording. I'd be glad to answer. Okay. I'm going to turn off this one. I know I'm going over the graded assignment before we get off, so I have that next on my list. Oh, Git branch. I meant to do it as I went through this. I won't go over Git branch, but I will show you how to do GitHub. If you go to GitHub, and you say new repository, and I called, what did I call this? Pet store, pet store. So I'm going to do LC pet store. I'm going to make it public. Now, if you hit this add or readme, it will kind of mess up things. You want this as blank as possible if you already have code. Now, if you create this first, pull this down and then start coding, you can do whatever you want to, but I did it backwards. I'm going to create this, but I already have code. So I'm just going to leave it as blank as possible. I'm not going to add a readme. I'm not going to put a get ignore, and I'm not going to put a license in there. I'm just going to create the repository. So whenever I do this, I got to somehow attach this. So if you've done this kind of thing before, create a new repository or push an existing repository. So that's what I want. Okay, so I got to go. I don't know why I put that. Back to my pet store. I'm going to go to the terminal. I'm going to do git init. I think there's another command. Just git init. Okay. Sorry, my shortcut keys are not working. So git init. So if you are in your root directory, which I didn't change anything out of it, I'm just going to say git init. This is initialized. So I'm going to initialize my git repo. So it says that it initialized it. So I'm good. If you see they all turned red because I haven't committed anything yet, I can add a readme. But I'm going to go ahead and skip the add readme. I'm going to do git commit, first commit. Obviously, there's a lot of things I didn't do, so I need to do a git add. And then I'm going to do a git commit. I'm going to make sure that my branch is on the right one. Actually, I'm going to actually add this thing first. Just so you guys see, I'm going to do the git status first so you can see that this is in the same category. So on branch master, nothing to commit. That's the reason I didn't want to switch my branch to main because I'm already on a branch. Oh, this sets my main branch to main. Anyway, I'm fine with master. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to add the origin. What this line right here does is it connects my GitHub repo, my online one, to my local repo. I think some people are still confused, and it is confusing, that you have a local repo and an online repo, a remote repo. So I can do everything through Git locally and never push it up and never show it to the public anywhere, but still use Git. So then I can still have all those Git commands to revert things, to create branches, and I'm all doing it locally. But some of you are confused on how to get it up online. So if you do this git remote, add your origin that you have to this. GitHub likes main, sure. I have seen places at work that this is master instead of main. I think Git likes master. GitHub likes main. New branch, and it's up on main. So if I go to my pet store now, here's all my code, and it's on my main branch. And that capital M set this capital M set my master. Like that's my default branch now. Right there, default. And here's all my code. All I did, I went to GitHub. That's all I did. If you do, so I'll state it real quick. I won't actually click a lot of the buttons. If I just do new repo, make a blank one and hit the create repo, it tells me all the directions right there to use in my command line. So GitHub is actually really good about their documentation. So yeah, and that's what my last one was push origin to main. So I actually pushed it up. If you wanted to create a branch, I'll go over the branching stuff next time. I'm actually going to write myself a little bit of a note. Right. Yeah. So how to change them? Yeah. So if I get branches or get branch, it'll tell me that I only have one. I can do get checkout -B makes the new branch, and then I would say like new branch, whatever you want to call it. And now I've switched to new branch. I know that because in the come on, IntelliJ. In the bottom right, come on. There we go. It finally caught up. In the bottom right on IntelliJ, it should tell me what branch I'm on. So it says new branch. And so now I can do everything I want to, and it only stays in the new branch. So in my pet controller, I'm just going to delete this and have an empty string. That's so good for me. So then I go down and say get add. And again, I'm not explaining a lot of stuff because I will go over this again, but then I do get commit. And then I do get push. Ooh, this says that I sometimes forget this. The first time you push, you have to copy and paste this thing. So this actually says get push upstream. If you guys are not reading when you're doing get, you have to read each line. They actually tell important stuff. Unlike whenever you do like actually run your program, there's a lot of just random information. Get is one of those that I read every single line. Did I close my repo? Okay. So here I made a new branch. It's called new branch. And then if we look at the controller, not that one up, two up. Nope, I went into test. I don't even know why I went into this. Controller, pet controller. If I look here, my, I know it's hard to see, but my return statement's blank. Okay. As you can see, I actually really like Git. I'm pretty good at it. I have people at work that like just have me stand over their shoulder and do Git. I'm not like the best at it, but I am very consistent in what I do, and then I can do what I do. So I will do more Git branch stuff later. I think there is, as soon as we start Unit 3, because we have to actually work with Git as a group, there's actually a little activity. I can't remember if LaunchCode did it or if I was the one that just said, let's do this activity. But I know that I had that with people. So I'll show that as well when Unit 3 comes. All right. Data assignment 2, and then I'm done. I'm reading through the things real quick, make sure I didn't. If I didn't answer your question, ask it again, because I think I answered all those. Okay, so on Assignment 2. So the big question that everybody wanted to know, when I'm looking at the tasks, over on the left here, kind of roughly speaking, you know, which ones are going to take longer, which ones are going to be shorter. As we go through this, this one is it's not confusing as much as you're going to do a lot of code. And then on the last task or two, you're going to undo a lot of code. So just so you're aware, you're going to make the current code work. Now, it's not going to pass all the tests, but it's going to work. And then as you go through, you will be creating your own tests, and then refactoring, and then doing a bunch of, and I'll explain some of this. So you're going to get the starter code. I think it's on Canvas, so you can look at that. You're going to change to object-oriented. So these are all the objects that are given to you. I'll show that here in a second. You're going to open up the jobs class. You're going to see the following fields that they have: a name, an employer, a location, a position type, and a core competency. So these are the key things that a job must have. Okay, so you definitely read this. I'll explain some of this in a second. How to run your tests. I'll show this live too, but if you're on a Windows device, your test will not run correctly, even if you do it right. I'll explain what that means in a second. And then here's your tasks. Okay, this is what I was looking for. So the first thing you're going to do is review the employer class to learn how to assign a unique ID. Okay. So this one shouldn't take terribly long. Adding setters and getters and custom methods like toStrings and toEquals, that you're going to add that to these. Use the generated code. So if you're using the code generated stuff, this should not take very long either. You're going to complete the job class using what you learned in steps 1 and 2. Depending on certain things, you should not need a lot of time on step 3, but that might take you some time. And then what you're going to do is use unit testing to verify the constructors and equal methods for the job class. This might take you a little bit of time. I would go back to the test-driven development stuff. Look at the code where we have written tests before and copy and paste some of those things. That structure is still the same, but this is where people should slow down. So steps 1, 2, and 3, you should feel like, oh, I'm going kind of fast through this. And then on step 4, you're like, oh, unit test, I don't know what that means anymore. I got to go refresh. And so go refresh, and then write your tests. You're going to then use TDD, test-driven development, to design and code a custom toString method for the job class. So again, at first, you can just import the generic one, but eventually we need to actually create one that looks nice. So you're going to create a custom toString for the job. And you're going to use test-driven development, meaning you're going to write tests that test this toString method to make sure that they do what they need to do. This step 6 takes, well, code-wise, this one is also very quick, but actually understanding and going through all the errors that you guys will be creating by doing this will be the longest one. So if you get through it and you can like mentally picture, and I will explain some of it, mentally picture all 4 of these things all kind of together in the same space and how they connect to job, some of you might be able to get through number 6 quick. But in my experience, that's like the 1%. Most people try something and then it fails, and then they're trying something and they're failing. That's what you're going to do on number 6. You're going to have lots of errors, and you're going to fix the error, and then you're going to do it some more, and then you're going to fix some more errors. So just know that that's how 6 is. Anytime you do code refactoring, because that's all number 6 is, refactoring your code, there is potential for there to be errors. And I think it's very easy to overlook something because you just assume I had it working. On step 5, my code works. And now I tear it apart, and on 6, now my code doesn't work. And you got to make sure that it does. So number 6 is the wild card. Some people, it doesn't take too terribly long, but some people, that is where they get stuck. So again, this one goes kind of fast. It's just like the first one. Hopefully you guys saw from the first one that if you knew how to do everything, the first one was literally less than 20 lines of code and you were done. But you had to look at code that already exists, and then you had to understand how it works. That is real world. Get used to that debugging and trying to figure out what code actually works. That's what it would it make sense to create a branch? Okay, yes and no. Branches, in my opinion, are for features, and it's for non-linear features. So if I am working on a team, I want to create a branch because somebody else might push code before I push code, or I might push before they push, and it's not linear. Whenever you have step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, I would commit between each of them, because then you can always roll back to a commit. So if it's linear, you don't need branches, but you can. It's up to you. Again, I will go over the branching stuff, but again, branching does not make sense. It will not fully click until you start working with somebody else and you guys are both pushing code at the same time, and then you have to revert some things and it gets really messy. That's when branches help out. But when you're doing your own code and it's very linear, you haven't need to use branches yet. So, yep. That's exactly what I do too, Josh. Okay, so first of all, let me show you if I remember which one's the good one and which one's the not good one. I have finished and then I have not finished. I think this is I want to show you. Yes, I think this is the finished one. So I'm not showing any code here. You will create one extra class, but I'm not going to show any code. What I want to show is this main is the same main you have. Whenever you download it, it's just commented out. So I'm just going to run this. Again, when you run this after task 5, it will look the same as when you run it after task 6, because you're refactoring code. The code works either way. So after task 5, when you're going to be able to you run these without error. Do not change these because these are really good examples. You're going to be able to set up a job, and at first I think like location isn't set up right or something, so you got to go in and change it or whatever else. Do not change this main. This should work. So I've added 3 jobs. I know I'm not going into too much detail there, but I'm adding 3 jobs that have a name, an employer, a location, a position type, and a core competency. So those are the things that they set up at the very beginning. I'm going to create an array list. I'm going to have jobs, and I'm just going to print them out. Remember, this is because I'm printing out an object, it's going to call the toString method, and the toString method is then going to make it look like this. So that's the main thing. You're trying to get it so that you can create jobs, and then task 5 is creating it to look like this. So again, if it sounds super simple, and if I'm using that tone that makes it sound super simple, the code is actually very simple. That doesn't mean that it won't take you time. Just you guys are still at the start of Java. All right. Hopefully that makes sense on what you're looking at towards the end. There are tests that help you out, but I did want to show you, I am on a Windows machine. So if I actually do I did want to do one more call out on the test. I'll do the call out later. Because I'm going to show you some of this. You can just run these, so run tests. The other way to do it is if you go over to Gradle, Run configurations in Gradle. There should be tests. So you can actually run the actual class, or you can run the tests. So run the tests. Anyway, this code is correct. When in Windows, it calls these line separators, and you don't need to memorize this because in the real world you just don't mess with them. But because they call line separators, a Windows line separator like a /n is different than a Mac's line separator. Macs use just /n, where I think Windows uses a /n/r or something like that. It's a return instead of a new line. Again, visibly, it says here, contents have differences only in the line separators, meaning this uses an LF and this uses a CRLF. That's the only difference. So if you can get your test to look identical and the only difference is the contents have differences in the line separators, then you are running your test correctly and you have everything good. I don't know if we will be able to change LaunchCode's thing of testing before that. I doubt it, because I think I saw one IA post that they had a pull request from September that has this change that would make this work, and they haven't approved it yet. So it's just slow moving. So I do want to make that call out. Contents of differences only in line separators, you're doing everything fine. And the only way to know that is if you do this click to see difference. If you are on a Mac, you will not see this. On a Mac, it'll work perfectly fine. So that's finished code. Let's go to the code that they give you and give you a huge hint on how to kind of start. First of all, your job class, all these things, and it tells you what to do. Please use the code generation. In real world, I use code generation at my job. Just do it. There are two big concepts here. First of all, the first place that people get stuck are these tests. When you do your test, you are going to actually write this job test. So when you get to step 4 and 5, you're going to create some things in here. So then the question was, on theirs, they have this thing where you go up here and you have to do like edit configurations to create this job test to then test your job. Once you actually put a test in here, so let's actually put a test in here. So at test, public void, assert equals, I think that's what it, I think that's the right one. Assert equals, so I'm seeing is something equal to something. And so the first thing I do is I put whatever I want. And then does it equal? Now, obviously, I'm typing in the same thing twice. This is not what a real test should be doing. It should be calling a function or creating a job and then seeing what's printed out and testing that way. I'm just doing this to show you that once you create a test in here, here's these little play buttons that pop up. They don't pop up until you create a test, but once you create a test, you can actually run the test and see if it runs. So if you want to go through what they did and actually set up an actual like configuration, go ahead and do that. But if at any point you're like, I tried to set up the configuration, it didn't work, do not stop. Just create the test and hit the run button. Because if I run it again, now that I made them not equal, this should fail. So it failed. So yes, setting up test configurations are nice, but not when it's just one file. You just create it and you hit the run button. So don't want you to get stuck on certain spots. As I'm reading the questions, ask any more, and then I'm gonna probably stop and slowly get out of here. Messages in Git that say LF and CLF, yeah, whenever it saves it and does all that stuff, you don't have to worry about it. It's just, yeah, how different operating systems handle new lines. I'm going to stop the recording.